Amanda, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the virtual convening on high tunnels with the Ohio Food Policy Network. Today we're going to be learning about statewide challenges and opportunities that are related to high tunnels, which are one of our key agricultural tools for season extension or year-round growing. So we're going to start with just talking about how high tunnels work, their purpose, their prevalence. We have a short presentation we'll watch from a professor at Ohio State University. And then we will open it up and get some more information from our educator, Mike Hogan, here with OSU Extension Franklin County. We'll also open up the floor to a lot of our guests that you'll see here as panelists and talk about challenges, issues, and opportunities that they have encountered in their journey through urban agriculture. So, and then we'll kind of end with talking about some of our opportunities to advocate in the policy space together. So my name is Karima Samadi. I'm a policy analyst here in food systems at Columbus Public Health. I'll pass it over to Brian to introduce himself, and then Brittany.
Yeah, hi everybody, Brian Estabrook, and I'm with Franklin County Economic Development and Planning in Columbus, Ohio, where I work as a food systems planner. And I should also say that Karima, myself, and Brittany are also all members of the Ohio Food Policy Network's steering committee. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Brittany Jones so she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I am Dr. Brittany Jones, but you can just refer to me as Brittany. I am an independent scholar, but I like to refer to myself as a scholactivist, so a scholar and activist, especially when it comes to food systems and equity within food systems. I'm also the founder and CEO of Growing Back to Your Roots, which is a food justice organization within the state of Ohio. And I'm just glad to actually have this conversation because this is one of the biggest obstacles that is faced with those who want to do urban agriculture within the state of Ohio and really anywhere where there's not policy regarding just these structures in general.
Awesome. And to our other panelists on the call, I'd love for you to also introduce yourselves and also wanting to open up the chat box. Those of you who are joining us today, please enter your name and affiliation in the chat box as well so we can get to know you. So we'll start with Mike.
Thanks, Karima. My name is Mike Hogan. I'm an OSU Extension educator working in the area of urban food system development, primarily in Columbus, but statewide as well.
Okay. William, would you like to go next?
Hello, my name is William Cook. I'm an urban conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Services. I cover Cleveland and Akron area. I'll talk more a little later. Thanks.
Great. All right, Ariella.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ariella Brown, and from the title, I actually was a congressional staffer from Congresswoman Marcia Fudge's office, who really spearheaded the Cleveland Seasonal High Tunnel Initiative, working with USDA and RCS. So I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you. Trey, you just joined us.
Yes, I did.
All right. Would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Trey Sheldon. I'm a zoning plan examiner for the city of Cincinnati, and I was chiefly responsible for being on the working group, at least on zoning. Essentially, we wrote chapter 1422, which is the urban agriculture chapter for the zoning code, to clarify things and make it more user-friendly for basically anybody, but for citizens especially.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear more about that. And last but not least, Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin Henderson with the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environment and Sustainability, and I manage the city's urban agriculture program.
Thank you. So yeah, those of you who just joined us, this is kind of our rough agenda. This is an informal conversation. Soon you all, after we play a video, will be promoted to panelists. So we'll get to see each other's faces and interact. But this is kind of a rundown of what we have in store for the next hour and 20 minutes. Yeah, we're excited to learn together. And just kind of a note about these virtual convenings. They're not a one-off. If we end today's conversation feeling like this lends itself to follow up, we can have that opportunity to meet and chat again. So yeah, I will stop this share here and I'll pass it back over to Amanda to share our High Tunnels 101 presented by Dr. Matt Kleinhens. He is actually in Australia on a Fulbright project right now, but he is kind of our one of our, I would say, controlled ag gurus at Ohio State. He has an extension appointment as well, but he's in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. So.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to go ahead and screen share.
And Amanda, while you're doing that, I'll just add that if there are any questions that anyone has as this goes on, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. So pop your questions into there. We'll be monitoring that. And we're going to play about 11 minutes or so of this recording. And it just sort of level sets us all to understand what high tunnels are and how they're used and some of the challenges and opportunities with them. So thanks, everybody.
All right.
Hello, thank you for participating in this very important program. My name is Matt Kleinhens. I'm with the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science. I'm based at the Ohio State University campus in Worcester, Ohio, formerly known as the Research and Development Center. I have the title of Extension Specialist, which means I work directly on behalf of stakeholders. And my primary stakeholder community are those folks who are interested in producing vegetables for profit, vegetable growers. But I do work with a wide range of other people as well. And as you'll see, many of the stakeholders I work with are using high tunnels. And I've been invited to or asked to provide a bit of a High Tunnels 101 over the next 12 to 15 minutes in this recording. I certainly would rather be joining you in person and live, but circumstances won't allow that. So we'll proceed with this medium, and I hope you find the comments useful, and we'll be looking to contact you again or have you contact me at another time. So my specific responsibility today is to provide a bit of table setting for discussions that you are likely to have for the rest of the program, and to somewhat orient you to what high tunnels are, how they are used, and what their overall safety is regarded as being in a day-to-day sense. And I hope that by the end of the comments that I have for you today, that you have a bit of an expanded understanding or appreciation for the purpose of high tunnels and high tunnel production, how prevalent they and it are, the basic details of high tunnel production, and I will conclude with some comments about their safety. So what are high tunnels? High tunnels are open framed, clear plastic covered structures. You see here what is called a single bay high tunnel. Notice that it has an open frame consisting of ribs, and that those ribs are covered with clear polyethylene film, and that the end of the rectangle is capped with two walls that are similarly set up as the top and the sides. This particular high tunnel is 21 feet wide by 48 feet long, and it illustrates well the same setup that we saw in the previous slide. Steel bows attached to posts that are driven into the ground. That structure is covered with clear polyethylene film, and the two ends are capped with plastic, in this case hard plastic, with swinging doors, in this case swinging doors. Each high tunnel is tailored to the local and farm conditions. So what you see are variations in the height of the sidewalls, the pitch of the roof, and other features. But suffice it to say that the basic structure is always the same: steel posts, steel ribs over the top, and then covered with clear plastic, and then some form of end wall. This particular high tunnel is 30 feet wide by 80 feet long, and the most common structure in Ohio is 30 feet wide by 96 feet long. Regardless, nearly all high tunnels are installed using a process I'll illustrate here very briefly. A site is selected, which is very important. Posts are driven into the ground. Those steel ribs are attached to those same posts. and creating a structure like you see here off to the right. And at some point, the clear polyethylene film, which is about 6 mils in thickness, is stretched over the top and attached where it needs to be at the sides and at the ends, creating essentially an enclosed structure, thanks to that clear polyethylene film in those ribs. Most high tunnels, by definition, are large enough to walk in, to work in, and maybe even drive in, as illustrated here with Pete Johnson of Pete Screens, who has also constructed a number of high tunnels using locally available materials. As you see, he used timber, the same purpose, but the principle is the same. They are designed to be able to be used year-round. Whether they are used year-round is a separate question, but they're designed to withstand heavy snow loads and high winds. If they are constructed properly, sited properly, and managed properly, high tunnels can withstand surprisingly severe weather. And again, designed to be used year-round, it's designed to withstand the snow and ice and wind loads that can occur in nearly every location. If done properly, this is a picture taken in Worcester, Ohio. And even in the middle of winter, we can be harvesting cold hardy crops that were established before that wintertime period or even during it. This picture was taken in Michigan. Notice the snow around the sides and at the ends of the high tunnel and the lovely crops that are held within. And this picture illustrating the same thing, that in the middle of January in Worcester, Ohio, we can harvest table-ready vegetables and other crops as need be. Now, again, the choice as to whether or not a high tunnel is used year-round is user by user, made by individual users. The most common crop grown in high tunnels is tomato and grown during the main season. So the question remains, will additional crops be grown and harvested in the so-called shoulder seasons of fall and spring? Or in some enterprising cases, people have actually made their main season crop, their primary crop that is, the fall to spring harvest periods, and have declined to participate in the very robust competitive market of main season tomato production. Before we move away from the structures entirely, I would like to emphasize that all high tunnels are not these single bay structures that you've been seeing so far, that they can be what we call multi-bay with individual Quonset-like structures attached to each other at the sides. And in doing that, we create the potential for very large installations. And by the way, those installations can go over even undulating terrain, all in the name of protecting crops. So it's not surprising that given what you've seen so far and heard so far and what you'll hear and see coming up, that nearly half of all US and Ohio vegetable growers practice some form of protected, semi-protected cultivation. And high tunnel is just one example of that. And because of the prevalence of that semi-protected production in high tunnels, it can be said quite correctly that high tunnels and other types of semi-protected production contributes very significantly to farm economies, food chains, food systems, and food security across our landscape, locally to regionally and globally. High tunnel use continues to rise very sharply. We have some statistics in this slide that I won't necessarily read to you, but I'd like to just emphasize that how that increase continues, and throughout my entire career here at OSU and 18 plus years working with high tunnels, that the numbers continue to rise, and the number of people interested in practicing high tunnel production continues to keep pace. This isn't very surprising. If you take a way step back, a very large step back, previously humankind, we were a bit nomadic, and we foraged and provisioned our food, or we followed it from place to place. When we decided to stop doing that and instead to put down roots, so to speak, in one spot, we then needed techniques, practices to produce our own food in place. And that immediately set up this particular feedback loop, which we in the agricultural domain work with all the time. We recognize that the weather plus the management create near crop conditions, that the genes of those crops dictating their physiology, though that combination of weather management, near crop conditions, crop genes, and physiology lead to cropping outcomes. And those outcomes go back to management decisions. So this is how essentially farmers learn, of course, in the School of Hard Knocks on occasion. Illustrate that another way, we can put a crop in a particular location, which has a typical weather pattern. The farmer will make decisions around how to manage that crop. Those decisions will influence the microenvironment nearest to the crop. That environment, along with the crop genetics, will again determine the crop and farm outcomes. So why is this linked to high tunnel production? It's because high tunnels create and maintain an exceptionally important environment. Those are exceptionally important tools because they create and maintain near crop environments that are good for the grower and good for the crop. They, in effect, mitigate farmers' risk, and they can enhance the predictability, efficiency, and productivity of certain outcomes. Now, what environmental factors are we speaking of specifically? Temperature, relative humidity, light levels, the wind levels, the soil moisture levels, some others. All of these come together to create the production capacity of the crop itself. And in a high tunnel environment, they can be managed somewhat much more so than an outdoor environment, which you see in the upper left, and what we call low tunnel on the right. And then we have a high tunnel in the lower right, and then we have a climate controlled greenhouse. I'm showing this as 4 points along the continuum, the spectrum of near crop microenvironment management. In the outdoor setting, we have marginal control. We create some small control with our low tunnels. We create additional level of control with our high tunnels. Of course, we create higher levels of control still with green climate control greenhouses, and even they are not the top end because plant factories in which there are no windows, there is no soil, it is all a contrived system, comprise or represent the far end of that spectrum that I'm illustrating here in terms of the amount of time, effort, money, and so on given to controlling the living and non-living components of the environment immediately surrounding a crop. Go back again to this is the fundamental nature of farming. How much can the farmer manipulate the environment near the crop to bring out its genetic potential? And high tunnels are positioned at the low end of that spectrum relative to the space age, but they're certainly notches above the open field setting. So a high tunnel is best thought of as a system, and its 4 main components include the frame, the cover, and an irrigation system. After all, it's no longer raining in a tunnel, so the farmer needs to supply all the water. And the 4th component is the sunlight, which is the fourth and only fully natural component of that system. And these systems are functionally 100% solar driven because that's where the largest amount of energy is coming from to drive the heat, to shape the relative humidity, obviously to provide the light and so on. High tunnel growers are engaged day to day, hour to hour, month to month, crop to crop, in managing essentially fluxes of energy from the outside environment to the internal high tunnel environment, and from the internal high tunnel environment to the external environment for cooling and so forth. But this is essentially what is at work, the physics, if you will, behind the very biological process of farming. So,
Prima, is that where you want me to stop?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, this is a wonderful presentation that we wish we had like 2 hours for so we could really dig into, but it is a resource that we hope to provide for you. I'll also put Dr. Klein's information in the chat box for those of you who just joined us, but we also have a special treat in that we have Mike Hogan here with us from OSU Extension, and I'm going to pass it on to him, but he's going to talk about more specifically his experience in working with high tunnels in the field. So OSU Extension, as you know, and Mike will get into, is a education, will offer education and technical assistance around these. So he will provide some practice and local examples to fill in the gaps with what Matt just shared with us, which was mostly purpose and prevalence. So thank you, Mike.
All right, are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Perfect, and the slides are in the correct function?
I think you have to put it into presenter mode, Mike.
Yeah, that sometimes happens. Hang on a second.
Yeah. Be on the upper left, play from beginning, I think.
All right, are they in presenter mode now?
No, I don't think so.
Dang it, hang on a second.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. How about now? Should be now.
No,
Oh.
but we can see it like this if you wanted to share it this way.
Let me try one more thing.
Sure.
How about now?
No.
All right, well, then let's just go forward.
This is good.
What,
Yeah.
what I thought I would do is go ahead and share with you some of, as Karima said, some of my experiences, mostly working with folks that want to use high tunnels in more urban settings. Okay. I'm going to push back a little bit on the notion that high tunnels are critical to the success of urban ag because they aren't. They certainly are excellent production systems for urban growers where they match, where high tunnels match their objectives. But actually, we don't have to employ high tunnels to be successful in urban agriculture. We don't have to employ season extension if we didn't want to be successful in urban agriculture. If we wanted to use season extension techniques, there are other techniques we can use in addition to high tunnels. As a matter of fact, I would contend that we should probably use those first and in conjunction with high tunnels, then jumping right to high tunnels. And one of the reasons I say that is over the last 10 or 12 years working with urban producers with high tunnels is we've seen a lot of failures, unfortunately, but the good thing is we learn from those failures, right? And I think it was Ariella who mentioned the Cleveland High Tunnel Initiative. That initiative was an abysmal failure in one perspective. In that there were many high tunnels that never got used to their potential for a bunch of reasons. And so what I try to do when I work with folks who think they want to utilize high tunnel technology is kind of, certainly, work with Matt and share all the great things we know about how folks have used high tunnels, especially in urban areas and urban environments, but also some challenges. And sometimes I find it's kind of like debunking myths, if you will. So I've got a couple of slides where we'll talk about facts and fiction about high tunnels. Matt mentioned some of these, some reasons why someone might want to extend the growing season. Someone's in it for business, the first and the last crops of the season, they're going to bring the highest dollar, especially if they're selling at a community farmers market. And so, that can certainly be one objective. Some people just want to outsmart Mother Nature, want to be able to grow more food in a what tends to be small space in an urban environment. And there's nothing wrong with, that as well. High tunnels can be really useful when we're trying to address food insecurity, particularly in food deserts. If we can grow fresh, more nutritious, whole fruits and vegetables for a longer time during the year, certainly that's going to have a beneficial effect at the neighborhood level. When we're thinking about food insecurity.
Mike, if I can interject quickly, if you're advancing your slides, we're not seeing it. We're only seeing the title slide. Yeah.
I'm on the third or fourth or fifth slide.
So you might have to go into the PowerPoint. That's okay.
Let me
if
try
you just
something
click
else.
through the PowerPoint, then we'll see it because we're seeing the PowerPoint screen. So we see the title slide, but
Say that again, Karima?
we're just seeing the title slide on the PowerPoint screen.
Oh, wow, I don't know what's going on. Hang on a second. I'm going to close this and see if we can start another way. I don't know why that's happening. I'm going to stop screen sharing.
There we go. That we just saw you change the slide, so that
Yeah?
I can, yes,
That's bizarre. I don't know why, but we'll go with it.
okay.
All right.
And just wanted to take an opportunity to say, folks, feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can call on you if you have a question for Mike.
And I don't know, maybe we should have said this at the beginning, but I don't know if Amanda has the opportunity or Brian or Karima, but I can share, these slides if you guys can make them available to anybody wants, or somebody just emails me.
Sure.
I can make a PDF and send it to them as well. So
Great idea.
Appreciate you guys fixing that. All right. Another reason why you might want to extend the growing season, really kind of to match if you're in a school setting and trying to match, the garden season, the produce season here in Ohio with the school year. If you're not in year-round school, season extension is a great way to be able to do that. And we've had some really good examples in our Columbus public school system of a lot of school buildings putting in season extension beds as a way to do school gardening when the students are there during the school year. As Matt mentioned, we can improve crop quality and value for many crops when we use high tunnels. And really, we can increase production and or profitability. And so there are many good reasons for folks to consider a high tunnel. Gosh darn it, this is doing crazy things today. But as I've worked with growers over the years, there's been some growers that wanted to employ the use of a high tunnel, I think for some reasons maybe that weren't as appropriate as some others. Or I think sometimes some folks oversell the technology, a high tunnel technology. And so what I thought I would do is just give you some of the questions, I've heard over the years, some of the misconceptions, what I call fact or fiction. And if at any point you have questions, go ahead and shout them out. We can also take time afterwards to discuss more in depth. But one of the first things I hear is, if you have a high tunnel, we can grow year round in Ohio. And, I guess define year round. I'm not so sure it's logical to expect that we're going to grow, 365 days of the year, from late December to, let's say, the middle of February. Not only do we most years in most places in Ohio have a lack of the temperature that's required, we have a lack of light. Okay. And so I'm not so sure it's, that I think we'd be more reasonable to think maybe 10 or 11 months a year production. Folks that are doing high tunnel growing here in Ohio, a lot of them shoot for 10 months production, gives them time to switch out to crops, to clean out the high tunnel, do maintenance or whatever. And so I question, I don't know a lot of folks who are doing truly year-round growing with high tunnel. I'm sure there are, but many folks, do it for a limited amount of time, less than 12 months per year. I'm going to do something different here. I've heard folks say that, just to be successful in urban ag, just get a high tunnel and automatically we can improve, profitability and we can make more money, and perhaps folks can, have a more year-round income stream. And that may work as long as we know what we're doing, as long as we know what we expect, as long as we develop the management skills to manage the high tunnel, as long as we have the labor. And so, high tunnels might improve profitability depending on your management, your marketing strategy, as well as your production system. And there's definitely a bug in here because my computer is not cooperating either. I've heard folks say, there are free government grants out there for high tunnels to fund high tunnels, and why wouldn't you get one? And really, I'm not so sure that's completely accurate. Most of the funding that's available is cost share funding, primarily through the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and it's cost share funding. The costs don't totally cover the cost of the structure, of installation, of any site preparation that might need to be done, or other equipment costs that you might need to get for irrigation or other supplies. So I think it's, I think going back to the Cleveland initiative, that was part of the problem. I think people just saw these as windfalls financially, and everybody should have one. And then everybody really wasn't equipped to utilize them, to receive training, whether it's on operating them or marketing or whatever. And so certainly the cost share funding is incredibly helpful. Many urban growers have accessed that funding, and NRCS is doing a great job of working with folks to get them funding. But we've also seen lots of folks who have got the cost share and did not weren't completely successful with getting the high tunnel working the way they wanted to. I've heard folks say that, we can use high tunnels, we can improve high tunnels by making them high tech, and even permanent, and adding, concrete floors and supplemental heat, electricity and things like that. And I think that's a real, a real danger. The real benefit of high tunnels is that they are low tech. is that they are relatively inexpensive. They are not permanent. Certainly they have limitations because of all those characteristics, but most of those characteristics are what make them attractive to growers of vegetables and fruits. There are some other, potential pitfalls from trying to add high tech and permanency to these low tech and what is really temporary structures, especially when it comes to zoning and the way we work with folks. Some folks have wanted to take these and make them into almost outdoor classrooms for schools, and what some of the zoning folks, say is that makes that a public building, and here's what you're going to have to do to make that a public building, and that's those things you have to do are not financially feasible. And so I think the best use of high tunnels is their low tech nature and to really capitalize on that. Now, can we install fans and electric motors that move the sidewalls up? Absolutely. But I think when we take that further, we're probably not using the technology in the best way, I think. I've heard folks say, high tunnels must be allowed in my city or whatever political subdivision you might be in, because I see people using them. So obviously I can get one, and they're permitted by my city. And that may be true, that may be not true. We've had a lot of high tunnels that were put up without permission or not according to rules type of thing. And I know that happens in other cities as well. Some cities, have regulations that actually permit structures like this. Some have ordinances that prevent structures like this in certain situations, and many others have zoning that's more silent on these type of things. And so you really do have to work with the building and zoning officials in your city or political subdivision to determine what the situation is. And while I know a lot of folks that just plot ahead and install them and ask questions later, it makes more sense, especially if we want to see more high tunnels in the city and people using them to improve profitability and the scope of the food system in an urban environment. It makes more sense to try to do that within the confines of the ordinances that exist, or change the ordinances like we've done in Columbus, working with city officials.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Are you able to wrap up in about a minute just to keep us on schedule? Okay, cool. Yeah. Thanks.
And then I've heard folks say, we're experts at growing vegetables. So our outdoor production systems, whether they're in-ground systems or raised beds, are very productive. And so we should be successful in growing in a high tunnel. We're just going to, cover some ground that we already have. And I'm not so sure that's an accurate portrayal as well. The most skilled vegetable growers may not have the innate skills, required to manage vegetable production in the environment that, Matt kind of gave an introduction to. And so I would encourage folks, before you ever, decide whether or not a high tunnel is for your operation or not, go to some of the high tunnel workshops that we put on through OSU Extension with Matt. We've done them in person. We've done them virtually. Learn from other growers. Go find a grower in your city or wherever you are that is using a high tunnel successfully, and go ask them, what they would do differently. What type of skill sets did they have to develop to manage vegetables in that environment compared to in-ground and bed production. And the last one, I've heard folks say, I really need to do season extension, and the high tunnels are really the only way to do that. And that's just totally false. There are lots of different season extension methods that someone can employ. Here's a list here of some that I think of right off the top of my head. I would definitely think about trying low tunnels or caterpillars or some other season extension before you use high tunnels. And really, the goal should be to employ as many season extension techniques on this list as you can, either with or without the use of a high tunnel. So there are lots of resources on using high tunnels. I will make this presentation that has a list of a lot of the different resources that we have and USDA has and other entities have. I'll get this to Amanda, and if anybody wants a copy of it, just email me. I can send you a PDF of it as well. So Brian, we can open to questions if you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. That was excellent. And I love the fact or fiction kind of approach to that, because there is a lot of confusion when it comes to regulation and use. And so I know Brian's going to dig into that a little bit deeper here in our next portion, but just wanted to open it up to the floor to see if you all had any questions or thoughts, reflections, anything come to mind with what you've heard so far, with our background and overview on purpose, and prevalence and practice. Thank you, Robin. She said it's helpful to hear these considerations, and we will share that Mike's presentation out with everyone. So thank you for making that available, Mike. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, we'll pass it over to you then, Brian. Okay, we got a question from Kara Young. Is there anything NRCS has going with rainwater collection off the tunnels? Okay, Mike, to your knowledge, anything?
Yeah, I thought there was someone from NRCS on, but they do have cost share that for other equipment like irrigation, and I'm pretty sure that they do allow rainwater harvesting expenses as part of that through EQIP. But I would defer to your local NRCS representative for your county would be the best place to start.
Yes, and we have Will. Thank you, Will. Yes, perfect.
Yeah, so there are different rain gutters. This rain gutter collection that we employ is one practice that goes along with the high tunnels. And that's basically just gutters on the side that collect the water, and it either goes into a rain barrel or some sort of collection facility. But for the most part, that water, I'll just leave it there unless you have more questions.
Okay, did that answer your question, Kara? Let us know. Okay, any other thoughts, questions, reflections?
I want to ask one question. I believe Mike just went before. So besides economics, like, what do you think the purpose of the high tunnel is?
I'm not sure I'm following you, Will. Besides,
I guess what I mean is, I like outside of the economic use of, because we know all the benefits from our, for the first presenter, as far as like why we want to extend the season and all the benefits of a high tunnel. But like besides that and the economics of it, like far as season extension and the economics of it, like what other like purposes do you think the high tunnel like holds?
Well, we do get higher quality produce in most cases, and it can be significant. A good example is what a lot of successful growers are doing is they're using high tunnels to grow early in the season greens, other cool season crops, and then transitioning and transplanting tomatoes into the high tunnels for summer production. Tomatoes, as you know, are very heat-loving crops, so they do very well. But the other real benefit is we see incredibly small amount of blight and other disease pressure when we grow tomatoes in the hoop house. So there's some real production benefits there, and obviously the yields that go along with them. And then the other one that maybe is a little bit bigger in scope, Will, is the whole food security thing. If we could be successful with getting more high tunnels in our community gardens, other community food projects in the most underserved neighborhoods we have, and making sure that food, gets to folks in that neighborhood, we can certainly address some of the emergency, food needs. And we have some projects that are doing that successfully in Columbus. But more than that, if we can get training folks how to use high tunnels, in urban agriculture, there is certainly the potential for more income generation in some of those underserved communities, in addition to the food security benefits.
Right, your second and third point are more like our goal and purpose with NRCS, because the economic benefits are good, but at the same time, like far as with the Cleveland initiative that you mentioned earlier, a lot of those participants, it is a food desert. So just being able to have access to that food there, whether they sell it or not, and also the education point of it, because a lot of kids, may not know where certain foods come from. I mean, there's high tunnels there that we use for education purposes that you may see an orange tree growing in, and that's something you may not see here. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
just that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you make a really good point, Will, about what your objective is. There's a high tunnel behind me in the virtual photo. That is a school high tunnel project, here in Columbus. And I think it's really important to match the objectives that you have, for whatever that might be, with the high tunnel project. I think where some of the frames that have never been used in Cleveland, the problem was they really didn't have very clear objectives. You can't just say we're going to build high tunnels and they will come, or we're going to build high tunnels and it'll address food insecurity, or there will be better education about where food comes from. You really have to, be very specific and strategic in developing the project and making sure that the high tunnel is going to achieve those objectives, whatever they are.
True.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, for that. And we're going to get to hear more about Cleveland's story here later, and stories from around the state, including Cincinnati and Toledo. But before that, we're going to have a little regulation overview, talking about barriers and around, which include zoning, as was mentioned in Mike's presentation by Brian. So Brian, I'm going to pass it over to you now. So thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Great. Yeah. And thanks to Dr. Kleinhens and Mike for those great presentations, just kind of getting us all on the same page. I did share in the chat a link to our running notes document for anyone who joined late. And there is in that running notes document, there is a little regulations overview summary that you can kind of refer to, which is kind of a high level overview that of some of the things I'm about to share. So I don't have it. I have one slide, which I'll refer to at the very end, but this is mostly just going to be conversational. And if you do have any questions, just pop them into the Q&A and we'll get to those. But basically, I want to use the next few minutes just to share an overview of how high tunnels are regulated and the different regulatory regimes that come into play, what some of the barriers and challenges are. And my goal is to keep this fairly high level. We can certainly get in the weeds a bit as the discussion moves forward. And there may also be interest in revisiting some of these topics in future virtual convenings. So, this is not necessarily just a one-shot thing. So first, let me define what a regulatory regime is, because I'm going to use that phrase a little bit. When I say that, what I mean is basically an institutional authority of some sort that has power to influence, direct, limit, prohibit activities in a given focus area. So if you think about the zoning code, the zoning code is derived from the state's police power. So that's an authority to influence, direct, limit, prohibit land uses. And so that is what I mean by a regulatory regime. So I'm going to talk about 4 regulatory regimes. That is not, those are not the only ones, but those are some of the key ones. So gonna discuss briefly the zoning code, building codes, stormwater regulations, and also land bank policies. So first, the zoning code. So zoning codes regulate the types of activities that you can do on a given piece of land. And historically, zoning codes have been used to separate out different kinds of uses. This is called Euclidean zoning within the planning world, to separate residential from commercial, from industrial, from agriculture, and keep them all in their own sections apart from each other. The zoning code determines where you can build something and for what type of use. And also things like the size of a building. It covers things like setback from the property line, height, lot coverage, these kinds of things. The Ohio Revised Code, which I might refer to in shorthand as the ORC, generally allows local jurisdictions to determine their own zoning, with some exceptions. And this approach creates a lot of jurisdictional fragmentation, which is a term that our friend Glenn Sweeney at the Kirwan Institute uses, which basically means that there are a lot of jurisdictions that have different rules that are all butting up against each other. As an example, in Franklin County, where I live, there are over 25 zoning codes in use. And you could live across the street from someone who lives under a different zoning regime. And that creates a lot of challenges when it comes to understanding the rules that apply to you. So zoning can impact high tunnels in several different ways. For instance, a zoning code can prohibit agricultural activities in particular zoning districts. This happens in many suburban areas, for instance, where agriculture might be viewed as a lesser land use and prohibited. Zoning can also regulate the height, size, setback, total number, and square footage of both primary and accessory buildings or structures. So if you think about on a residential lot, you might have a detached garage. That's an accessory building. The zoning code can say how many of those you're allowed to have and how big they're allowed to be and where they're allowed to be placed on your property. High tunnels can fall under that designation. Some zoning codes don't allow accessory structures to even be constructed if there's no primary building. That comes into effect and affects high tunnels when you have a vacant lot, for instance, that is a land bank property. It's a residential lot, let's say. There's no primary building, so can you put an accessory structure on it? Some zoning codes say no. Zoning can also determine the total lot coverage allowed, meaning how much of a given parcel of land can be covered up by things like buildings or structures. So as a, for instance, the city of Columbus, their regulations on single family residential lots say that no more than 50% of the lot can be covered by a building or a structure. So if your lot already has a house and a detached garage and a deck, maybe, then building a high tunnel there, even if you're allowed to do it under the rules, it may tip you over the 50% threshold, which then forces you to go through a variance process. And so ideally, you know, our zoning codes would allow for a wide variety of agricultural uses and accessory structures, including high tunnels, and be able to mix those uses together across different residential, commercial, industrial zoning districts. But that isn't generally how our zoning codes work, unfortunately. And that's true nationwide, not just in the state of Ohio. Secondly, I want to talk about building codes. Building codes are even more complicated, and I want to say up front that I'm not a building code expert, but this is what I have learned in my work to this point. So building codes regulate the design, construction, and modification of buildings for the purposes of public safety. So one way to think about the differences between zoning and building codes is that the building code is concerned with making sure a building is safe and well built and won't fall down, while the zoning code is concerned with where the building is located and what kinds of uses are going on inside of it. There are broadly two building codes that are used in the state of Ohio. One is the Ohio Building Code, which is focused on commercial buildings, industrial buildings, and large residential buildings. And then there is the Residential Code of Ohio, which is focused on 1, 2, and 3 unit residential buildings. These are statewide codes. They are considered minimum standards, meaning that everyone has to follow them. However, local jurisdictions can adopt and enforce additional regulations on top of those codes, as long as they're not excessive, and excessive is determined by the state of Ohio, and as long as they don't conflict with those existing statewide codes. And it's very complicated in terms of if a local jurisdiction doesn't adopt its own building codes, sometimes it defaults to the state of Ohio, sometimes it doesn't, and you can sort of build whatever you want to build. But I won't get into all that weedsy stuff right now. But basically, you want to call your local jurisdiction and ask what the building code requirements are for your area. It might be hard to find by Googling it. You typically need to go talk to somebody because it's all very confusing. One key point that we've learned through this process, and Kareem and I will talk a little bit more about this when we share the story about Columbus, is that agricultural buildings and buildings used for agricultural purposes, which is a specific term that is defined within the Ohio Revised Code. Those agricultural buildings and buildings used for agricultural purposes are actually exempt from the Ohio Building Code and the Residential Code of Ohio. Again, I'm neither a lawyer nor a building code expert, but we've learned that that the ORC basically exempts these buildings from building code standards because they're not intended to have a bunch of people inside of them. They're structures just for agriculture, and the state of Ohio wants to encourage agriculture. However, a local jurisdiction may have a different interpretation of the Ohio Building Code and the ORC than what I just said. And so that was an issue that we faced in Columbus, and we'll share a little bit more about that later. And lastly, on the building code, it's important to note that many folks, and Mike mentioned this, many folks want to use high tunnels for educational and classroom purposes. That is not considered an agricultural use. So that removes the agricultural exemption from the high tunnel. If you're going to have a lot of people in it and use it as a educational classroom. But somebody might say, well, what's the line between using it as a classroom and using it to train other farmers? And the answer to that is, I don't know. I'm not sure. We, talk to a lawyer, and each jurisdiction might approach it differently. And that's one of the challenges that we have. There's a lot of gray area here. I'm going to get to two more areas quickly, and then I will pass it along. So stormwater drainage regulations are developed and enforced by local jurisdictions with a focus on reducing flooding and erosion, as well as protecting water quality. The reason why stormwater drainage affects high tunnels is because most local jurisdictions will have developed stormwater management plans that require a property owner to essentially go out and pay for an expensive plan showing how they will handle stormwater drainage on their property. So for instance, the city of Columbus requires this if you are going to develop more than 2,000 square feet of impervious surface, meaning like water cannot run through it. To call back earlier to Dr. Kleinhen's presentation, the typical high tunnel size in the state of Ohio is 30 feet wide by either 80 or 96 feet long. Both of those high tunnel sizes would be over 2,000 square feet by themselves, just a single one of those high tunnels. So that by itself would eclipse the threshold that the city of Columbus has set for requiring an expensive stormwater management plan. So you have to think about that as you're creating things. And then finally, land bank policies come into play as well, because many vacant lots end up in the local land bank, and the land bank can control what happens on those sites. So land bank may prohibit certain kinds of uses like agriculture or structures like high tunnels on their site, on the land that they own. And some land banks may allow you to grow food, but not if you're going to sell that food. So they'll allow you to sell it for personal or philanthropic use, but not for sale. And that can be particularly impactful in jurisdictions that have a lot of vacant lots, such as the city of Cleveland historically. And so there are other regulatory regimes, and my last thing, Karima, if you wouldn't mind popping that slide up there on the screen, and then I'll just say that there are a lot of other regulatory regimes that come into play here. If you think about high tunnels as being situated within urban agriculture and agriculture more broadly, I've talked about a few here, but there are other state laws. There are public health departments that might have a say over some of these. We have to think about how property tax is assessed and whether a lot is considered a residential lot or if it's used for agriculture. There's going to be different levels of taxation there. And so there's a lot that goes into this, a lot of different regulatory regimes coming down, but hopefully as we're thinking about this, we can address it a little bit more intentionally moving forward. So that's it. And I do see there's one question in the chat. Karima, I don't know if we want to, you can unshare your screen if you want, that's fine.
Yeah, and this is coming from Robin. She asked, is the exemption from Ohio Building Code and Ohio Revised Code for ag structures dependent on the designated land use? Does it have to be designated ag land, or can it be zoned residential? And feel free to unmute if you wanted to ask that yourself too, Robin. But yeah, Brian,
Yeah.
over to you.
That's a great question. The way it's been interpreted locally, again, I'm not a lawyer, and each jurisdiction may interpret it differently, but the way it's been interpreted here is that it's not designated ag land only. It's any building that is being used for an agricultural purpose. Agricultural building or for an agricultural purpose across any zoning district, essentially. So that is the way it's being interpreted locally here in Franklin County and Columbus, at least. So if there are any other questions, or we can get to them later, but I'll pass it back to Karima and we can continue on. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. Those of you who nerd out on planning and zoning and code, hopefully enjoyed that. So lots to learn. I'm sure there's some things going on in your mind. We're going to start opening it up to our sharing portion, but I'm going to first pass it over to Dr. Brittany Jones here, who's going to talk a little bit and kind of like get that conversation bit started. And then we'll, pass it over to our friends in Cleveland and then Cincinnati to share their stories. And then hopefully if we timed it right, we'll have 15 minutes remaining at the end just for general sharing and question and answer. And, if we don't have an opportunity to talk about, what advocacy looks like, that could also lend itself to a part 2 of this virtual convening. So just, throwing it out there, if we end up having a lot of conversation and sharing that if folks feel like that's what we want to do, we can do that. So, all right, over to you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Karima. And Brian, you actually set me up for basically this story about what's been happening in Toledo. And it really does have much to do with those zoning codes and definitely those land uses. Currently in Toledo, there is still some conflict regarding just hoop houses, greenhouses, anything that's dealing with season extension in structure form that definitely has a lot of pushback. And it's mostly political. Mostly because the political side does not see it as a benefit, or at least an economic benefit that will be long lasting, or the actual citizens being involved in this. So this is actually entirely untrue, mostly because there was, I believe back in 2015, there was a huge conflict with a literal urban farmer who was within the inner city, who has taken up a lot of land, mostly about, at that time, it was about 2 acres that they were working on at that time. And so because of political tensions, it was a fight back and forth that resulted in a lot of fines on the farmers' behalf, a lot of protest on the farmer supporters' behalf. And then eventually it had grew into something of, resulting in an actual urban agriculture code. And so with that, even though the code is in existence until today, it is still very vague. So it is divided into major and minor agriculture. And within that, it does talk about structures. And actually, could I actually share my screen? Oh, perfect. All right, let me go to this flyer that I had got from one of my people that I used to work with, part of the Urban Agriculture Alliance of Lucas County. And so they were an organization that was really fighting for those policies in order for people to actually get into urban agriculture, not just community gardening, because there is a difference. Some people actually wanted to grow their enterprises and really get into that urban agriculture side in order to sell. So this was one of the products that came out of that in regards to if you wanted to do structures. One of the issues though was that these type of structures were regarded as permanent structures. And in doing so, they were under the control of just the accessory codes, in ensuring basically you would have to have all of these in place in order for you to even get permitted to have this structure within your actual yard. And so majority of them included the fees, included copies of site drawings, and also included an architectural stamp, which can cost, I believe, $500 and up, depending on what type of structure you were having. And that was a major obstacle that a lot of those who were interested in doing this, and this wasn't just individuals, but also organizations, majority nonprofit organizations, were having issues with coming up with that money and also with the maintenance of it. So as Mike has talked about in the further other presentation, just having that maintenance, having the people know how to make sure to tend to everything, that to keep it up and running, that was a major issue as well, because you can't just pop up a hoop house or a high tunnel and just think that is going to maintain itself. You have to have that knowledge behind it. But that was a lot of the issues when it comes to the failure of certain structures, but mainly it was economic. All of these fees that were associated with getting this actually permitted to be on site. It was also the issues with certain greenhouse and hoop house installers. Mostly they were located in the rural areas. They just found it to be unnecessary because of that cost. So within that, many of this whole ordeal just kind of went off to the side, and it kind of still is off to the side. But like I said, the code is still enforced, but the structures in general, it kind of just went off, and people were just like, okay, well, we're not going to fight it anymore. So in this instance, it is more of that political pushback and just those obstacles that have hindered a lot of the hoop house generation of that. And then also coming from there, there was, yes. So the residential accessory building requirements, one of the issues was that because this was considered a permanent structure, you would have to have actual foundations. And that was just not reasonable when it came to these hoop houses and high tunnels, because you don't need a concrete slab at the bottom of this structure. So again, it was a lot of these code obstacles that were causing many of this, basically delays in trying to get these structures within those particular areas. And currently, there is something happening as far as the planning department here in Toledo are actually being a little bit more receptive, or being very specific with who they help out. So that farmer that I mentioned in the past, basically he is now getting greenhouses and hoop houses installed, but that was because of the help of a USDA grant and the cost sharing, that's as was mentioned before. There's also a nonprofit that is also installing hoop houses as well, but that is part of a community building effort that will teach children how to actually, where the food grows, how to actually grow the food, tend to the food, and then use that more as an educational component. So that is really the only reasons why a lot of these structures are being accepted. However, overall, it is still that whole issue with the codes, and also with the money in general. And regarding just the actual size of it, you can't go above 400 square feet. And it cannot be higher than 20 feet in height. And so that also imposes a lot of different variations and sizes if you wanted to have one on a particular lot. And then also just regarding the overall mindset of urban agriculture here, which I know we'll talk about advocacy later, but it really is important to have that support system in place before approaching government entities regarding urban agriculture, and just showing its importance to the communities at hand. Because if they do not have any indication or feel that the residents do not need this or do not care, then it will not be pursued. And so that's why it's very important to gather those support groups, and even just trying to change the mindset when it comes to urban agriculture, in order to get all of those things that Brian has also talked about and showed in the slide in order for this particular field in order to grow. But really, things are changing. It's at a slow pace, but hopefully when it comes to these structures, it will definitely have a bigger impact than what was truly thought before. But really, that's all that's been happening really in Toledo. So I will pass it back to Karima.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brittany. It's really interesting to see, again, like you're talking about some same code in some cases, but how it might be interpreted differently in different municipalities. And Toledo looks quite restrictive, but we did have a couple comments or sentiment in the chat box about how, whereas the policy is restrictive, and the one pager or the education that they had out for the community is actually pretty great. So Robin from Cincinnati asked if you wouldn't mind sharing that in post webinar, just as a resource, again, as a demonstration of what educating at least looks like, even if, again, the motivations were different as to why it was so restrictive. So thank you, Dr. Jones. I will now pass it over to Cleveland, and just so that we have some time for Q&A at the end, if we can kind of cap it at 5 minutes each, so 5 minutes for our Cleveland story that I think Ariella, you and Will are going to tag team there, and then 5 minutes for Robin and Trey, and then we'll have some time at the end to kind of talk about, okay, where are we, what do we want to do next together, and again, what those opportunities for advocacy might be, and if it lends itself to a part 2 of a virtual convening. So, okay, over to you, Ariella and Will.
Ariella, you can go first because if you're with Congresswoman Fudge, you know the beginning story of everything.
Okay, I'm actually going to try to share my screen. If you all can just give me one moment. Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay, so good afternoon. I know that I only have a few minutes, but I want to say thank you for allowing me to just share a little bit about the Cleveland Seasonal High Tunnel project that was really started by former Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, who is now the HUD Secretary.
Hey,
Ariella, we're seeing,
Yes.
sorry, yeah, we're seeing your download screen, but
Oh,
not if you're
okay.
trying to share something else. Sorry about that. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, can you see that
Yes.
screen?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So as I indicated, I was one of the, I was essentially the staffer that carried out Congresswoman Fudge's goal of having 100 high tunnels throughout Ohio's 11th congressional district, which at that time encompassed Cleveland and portions of Akron. The project really began in 2012, and even though Congresswoman Fudge is no longer in office, I believe that that initiative is still taking place. And so, again, Congresswoman Fudge was on the House Agriculture Committee, and she realized that being on that committee really allowed her to be able to give a lot of funding and provide a lot of ag resources to, which is a historically urban area that in the past did not get a lot of funding as it relates to ag from USDA. And so some of our project partners were our office, so the Congressional Office, USDA and RCS, Fair Food Network, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, the City of Cleveland, and the Cleveland Cuyahoga Food Policy Coalition, and other local municipalities. And as others already have indicated, there are obviously different zoning as it relates to different communities. And so we really had a strong relationship with the City of Cleveland. And so really partnerships are key to really making this effort work. So I know that there was some talk about a lot of challenges about the Cleveland initiative and how it may not have been, there were some challenges. We understand that there were definitely challenges, but there were definitely more opportunities that came out of this initiative more than anything. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was addressed and that folks understand that we realized that this was a huge feat and it was going to take really a community effort to make this project truly a success, because some of the challenges that people have already talked about, zoning, the application process, the permit process, there were challenges just within the City of Cleveland. If you want to build a high tunnel on one street, but then, and it might have gotten approved, Then on another street, it may not have gotten approved. Or if you move into another municipality, it may not get approved at all. There were also issues around how much a permit costs for these temporary structures. And so these were all challenges that we had to face as project partners. And as the lead office from the congressional standpoint, we really knew that we had to make sure that we were trying to build people up for success, which is why we had to bring in individuals that were going to provide a lot of technical assistance and provide workshops to say, okay, this is what the application process looks like. So, you know, when you are applying for these federal dollars, let's make sure that you don't have any federal debt, because yes, there was a 90-10 cost share, but if you had federal debt at any point, even if you got approved, the government was going to take their funding before you even built the high tunnel. And then again, talking about the 90-10 cost share, even though, you know, I guess it's been said that this is a grant program, it's not a grant program. There is a 90-10 cost share. There were folks that still couldn't pay that 10%. So trying to, again, work with our program partners to figure out ways to support these efforts. And so talking about opportunities, again, turning vacant and abandoned spaces into green spaces and community gardens, and utilizing the seasonal high tunnels to extend the growing season, and really providing an opportunity for education for our youth, and providing opportunities for future generations, especially for individuals who don't have a lot of access to green space when we're going into these urban areas. Lastly, I just wanted to show this slide. Mr. Avon Standard was actually the first recipient of the Cleveland Seasonal High Tunnel Initiative. This is his farm in Cleveland. He actually was a farmer who actually gave all of his produce to his church. Another gentleman who had a really successful operation is Jamel Rakira, who of Village Family Farms, also in Cleveland. And I don't know how much time we have. There is a 5-minute video that I did want to play. So if we have time afterwards, we can go back and play the video. But it really just gives individuals an opportunity to understand how impactful this work really is, and how important it continues to be, even though we understand that there are still challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, and if we don't have time, if you could please send that video, we'd love to share it either in the chat or in the email that we send after this webinar. So, Will, is there anything you'd like to add before we pass it to our Cincinnati friends here?
No, I will leave more time. I'll say nothing if that leaves time for her to play the video.
We might not have time because we want to leave a little bit of time for discussion. But
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Anything you want to add to what Ariella shared?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say the Cleveland High Tunnel Initiative is still going. At this time, we have about 134 high tunnels on the ground. A lot of those high tunnels, like it's evolved over the years, are small high tunnels. So where people get 20 by 30, a lot smaller ones that are more manageable for individuals. But the initiative is still going. You can just reach out to your local NRCS, USDA office. With the Cleveland project, actually, our former state conservationist is now the chief of NRCS. And through it's a new urban ag initiative where you don't have to be in Cleveland, but it's throughout the whole United States. So within any urban area, there's an urban map on our website. You can apply for a high tunnel now. The zoning that everyone mentioned before has been a problem, but as far as through NRCS, if you can get through zoning and everything, if you're in an urban area, you can apply for a high tunnel. And I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah, and Will, if you wouldn't mind sharing those resources with us, we'll make sure it gets out to everybody, especially for the statewide resources. Thank you, Ariella, for sharing that in the chat. We'll send it in the email as well. So I will pass it over, last but not least, to Robin and Trey to share the Cincinnati story. Again, just a high level overview, if you don't mind. Yep. 5 minutes or so, just to leave time for Q&A. Yeah, but thank you.
Yep, not a problem. Thanks, Karima. I would just say that everything that everyone has spoken to so far, I think resonates on some level and in some aspect with what's happened in Cincinnati. our original thing was back in 2013, we did a state of local food report. One of the recommendations that came out of that related to doing season extension. And we did a lot of work talking to stakeholders about what they were interested in, the economic benefit of that, the personal benefit of that. And that was kind of the ground level that we laid things on. We were then fortunate in 2018 to have the Green Cincinnati Plan, which is the city's sustainability plan, speak to and have a recommendation to expand urban agriculture, which then translated, to Brittany's point, into political will, because it was endorsed by the city council. And we also then at that time, very shortly after that, had city council people who championed the idea of expanding access to urban agriculture and directed the planning department, the zoning department, Trey can speak to that in a second, our Office of Sustainability, the health department, and we convened stakeholders, the Food Policy Council, and then farmers and growers were at the table to revise the municipal code to make it easier and more accessible for people. But to Brian's point, it's not as simple as that sounds, and we revised it, but we've bumped into a variety of issues, and I would say mostly related to residential zoning. And I'll hand it off to Trey so he can speak to that, but I have a lot of thoughts about how we can all move forward. And I would already say there's a need for an additional convening, and I have some thoughts, but I'll hand it off to Trey to speak to that.
Put my mic down here. Thanks, Robin. So yeah, Robin, as Robin explained, she and I worked together on that working group. Let's just say from the very beginning that I find that with the urban ag thing, there was a wide spectrum of views of this, and I'm not going to say politically left and right, but just for some kind of reference point. So because I'm in enforcement with zoning and so on, maybe I come down a little right of center, and then maybe Robin's a little left of center, so to speak. But there are people that I'll give an example. When we were doing one of our stakeholder meetings, there was somebody who just literally straight-faced said they just love the sound of roosters in the morning. And so you could have somebody who really, really does believe that, but that person's probably pretty much on the fringe. There are other people who would be further, right, enforcement wise than me, that would be like, if their next door neighbor had a rooster crowing at 5 a.m, they would want to shoot it. So it's a wide spectrum of people that, a wide spectrum of perception, I guess I would say, for this. And for zoning, for enforcement, we have to work within, just, it has to be kind of a one size fits all, because there has to be, laws have to be generalized enough to embrace all situations that might arise. And so it was a kind of a challenge a little bit to do that, because we weren't just, in my view, we weren't just expanding agriculture for people. So Robin's basically an advocacy. And I was chosen because I have an environmental background. I actually have a big garden myself and some fruit trees. We raise chicken. We have eight hens and a farm pond, and grow berries and so on. So I had a background in that, and my father-in-law is also a equine vet. So we talked with some agricultural extension people even for the large animal aspect of our zoning code, because most of this high tunnel thing, but a lot of times you have things like animals, and sometimes they might go hand in hand if it's a large enough piece of property. I can say that in Cincinnati, high tunnels, we do not call them temporary structures. If somebody had kind of a low tunnel or a frost frame, we would treat it as a temporary structure. But realistically, people aren't putting the money into these things that they're having to, even with the funding. They're not taking it down during the winter. They're not going to remove the plastic or remove the ribbing and stuff like that. So to say that's a temporary structure, that's not what we could get to in our code. Anyhow, and part of it was to limit the number and spatial extent of these, the area of them, because while many people might think it was okay if there was a greenhouse in the backyard behind somebody's house, you could envision a situation in a residential district with a anyhow, with a residential district where you had a vacant lot, and we didn't want to have somebody filling the entire lot with high tunnels. I mean, that's getting absurd. Not many people would want that. It would mess with home values and so on, potentially. So those are just some of the obstacles that we faced. And the other was to make this so that even when we wrote it, we wrote chapter 1422, the urban agricultural chapter. It was a challenge to be both specific enough with the law, but also have it be user-friendly for the public to actually be able to read it and have some idea of what they could and couldn't do, and yet at the same time match the format of the rest of the zoning code. So I've talked with Robin about is gradually over time we're kind of getting a format together, working together where she can almost prep somebody if they're going to need a hearing, they're going to need zoning relief and so on, and let them know that ahead of time, because I'm used to dealing with architects and engineers and stuff, and some of these people are just coming in without any development experience whatsoever. They're just like, hey, why can't I do whatever I want? It's my property. So it's helpful for me really to have somebody like Robin. There's an advocate, and she also serves as kind of an intermediary, so that I'm not just looking like the bad guy. I'm just trying to meet the code and not have nuisances in the neighborhood.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that too. And I know you all in Cincinnati have also had some interesting approaches to advocacy, which include like just bringing everyone in the room, right? That slide that Brian shared that was like urban agriculture and all the arrows coming off, literally getting all those people in one room and with some lawyers, sprinkle them in there to talk about the code and how it's all interpreted. I'll just give a 1 minute quick overview. I know Brian shared a little bit, but what happened here in Columbus, and this was recent, but we have a new zoning rule now that doesn't require a building and planning review for high tunnels. But before the building, there was a requirement for a building permit because of how we were interpreting the Ohio building code. So it included the planning and building review and, all the wind and snow load and requirements, and so that it didn't present as a danger to health and safety for occupants. But as we know, and on this call, hopefully you learned, if you didn't already know, high tunnels are for agricultural production and season extension, so they shouldn't present a human hazard since they're not intended to be occupied. So we visited the code, and I have to kind of like give props here to Brian and his team for being investigators and kind of finding those exemptions, because they are hidden in definitions and links, and you have to kind of play a little detective game to find where it is. But we were able to illuminate that code, find that, in fact, there was an exemption, not because it was zoned agricultural, that it could be zoned residential, but in fact, because they were used for agricultural production, we didn't need a building and planning review. So again, save thousands of dollars, lots of time, energy, money. And so what we're kind of seeing, and hopefully you all on the call have also noticed, that there's lots of inconsistencies here and there, differences in interpretation. Maybe there's an opportunity that we can all work together here through the Ohio Food Policy Network. And I agree with you, Robin, definitely lends itself to another conversation about policy and advocacy. I know Brittany wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper, and we have some high level recommendations that I'll share in the chat box, but they're also in the running note stock. But with the 5 minutes that we have remaining here, I just wanted to open the floor. Feel free to go off mute, turn your camera on, share any reflections, ideas, thoughts, anything at all with us, or even, if you have suggested next steps on what we can do together, because there's definitely power in numbers. So yeah, I will end it there and share it, open the floor to you all on the call. Thank you.
So thanks for sending that list, Karima. I think it's super helpful and orients certainly my thinking, and Ariella's graphic of how to do that. I'm left kind of going, great, I want to create something like that. And that can be a partnership to help educate people. Moving forward, I would love to see us, to your last point, kind of, is there a way this could be a working group to synthesize or at least identify the best practices, or really go, here's where Brian, Pet Detective of the Year, was able to find, the exemptions that could potentially be in everybody's, and what would it look like to try and have a best practices. When we modified ours, we did research, but Ohio is Ohio. So this would be super helpful to get uniformity, especially as NRCS goes about promoting. That has been a challenge in terms of their working with different jurisdictions. So I would love to see that. I would love to see better understanding from my viewpoint of what kind of training there is that Mike spoke to. I'd like to understand that so I can pass that on or incorporate that in, or make sure I can get the right people to the table so we ensure that people are successful. So I would love to have more very productive, pointed conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, great. This was kind of to function as like an introductory, just to get, so that we all know each other and we understand the landscape and the background. But, now the real fun work begins, so what can we do together? And to Trey's point, working on code being specific enough, but not to the point that it's exclusionary and we're kind of like putting too much detail in there. We want it to be open and inclusive. So, and then also the communication piece. I love the one pager too, maybe not the content and Dr. Brittany and your, but the one pager itself, excellent opportunity for sharing. And of course, what Mike shared too in his PowerPoint. So there's, the translational bit here, right? And how to kind of communicate that to our urban growers in our respective municipalities. So yeah, any other thoughts, last minute thoughts, questions, ideas? You can use the chat box or unmute. We will be, yeah, go ahead, Brian.
And also just if anybody has any thoughts on if we do have another convening, what would you like to hear more about, as we move forward from this conversation?
I was wondering, is there some sort of, I've seen so many different methods of like Survey Monkey and some things like that, or I don't know if there's some kind of a way we could all, sometimes when I've served on various committees and boards and so on, outside of my contacts with the city, and oftentimes they'll kind of email everybody or do a survey as to what best dates are, like things like that. And then I guess my other question is if we were going to have follow-up, webinars like this, what would the periodicity be? Like, would you think like every 6 months, or like I didn't know about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we could definitely utilize surveys. Folks who registered for this webinar today, you'll be on our list. We'll reach out to you again and see if you want to chat again and when. And yeah, in terms of frequency, that's for us to determine. If we think every couple of months we want to meet, we can. There was another virtual convening group through OFPN that met on streamlining food benefits, nutrition benefits. So we've met a total of 3 times and decided, that's enough. We kind of did the work we planned on doing, and that working group popped up and dissolved. So, we'll see where this takes us, but yeah, we'll definitely email everyone out. Amanda, I'll pass it over to you to close us out, but that's all we have for today. We'll hopefully share all these resources with you as well, but thank you everybody for joining, sharing your stories, your questions, and looking forward to continued conversation.
Thanks, Karima. I just threw my email in the chat box. So I do have Mike's PowerPoint slides. I have the link for Matt Kleinhen's video, and I also have the additional video that Ariella mentioned. Brittany, if you could send me the graphic, and if there's any other resources that were mentioned, go ahead and forward those on to me. I will give it till Monday. I want to do kind of one email with every resource that was mentioned so they don't get lost in the mix. So Monday, I will send both the recording and all of the resources mentioned out to the listserv. And I will leave it up to Karima and Brian to determine when you guys might meet again. Karima, just to mention, we do not have anything scheduled for a virtual convening in July. So that opportunity is open. I think we were planning of just either not doing a convening or leaving it as an open space. So if you guys do want to do a follow-up next month, you absolutely can do that. But that's kind of it. I think this was probably one of our better virtual convenings. I think you guys did a wonderful job just collecting resources and speakers and the variety of context that was provided. So this was super great. So I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. And like I said, send anything you need to me, and this will go out on Monday. I hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for